Welcome to Get Paid for Your Pad, the definitive show on Airbnb hosting, featuring the best advice on how to maximize profits from your Airbnb listing, as well as real-life experiences from Airbnb hosts all over the world. Welcome. We are your hosts, Erik Paquet and Jasper Rivers.
Get paid for your pad. 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 Get paid for your pad.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Get Paid for Your Pad. Today I have a special guest. His name is Erik Paquet, and he is a travel expert and runs a website and a podcast at brothers.com. Erik, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jasper. It's great to be here.
So, Erik, can you give us a little bit of background of yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I started working as an entrepreneur. I got done with university and really didn't want to go the traditional route and get a job where I was going to be stuck in the same place. And so I started to travel. I spent a lot of time traveling around South America and, realized that I needed to find a way to be able to sustain that travel and make a little bit of money. And so I got into using frequent flyer points to earn and redeem frequent flyer points for travel, and discovered that it was possible to save a huge amount on airfare, pay a really small amount of what they sell tickets for by using those frequent flyer points. And so early this year, I started a company to try and help other people do the same thing. Had kind of built up a whole bunch of friends and family members that I was working with on this, and just saw a really big opportunity to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. Great. And since this is kind of your specialty, before we get into Airbnb, I know you have a ton of advice, especially for people who are U.S. citizens, but also for those who live in other countries. Could you maybe dive into some of the specifics of how can people save the most money on using those points?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the first thing to consider, the easiest way to acquire points if you are a U.S. citizen or have a social security number in the U.S. is that the banks are offering really big frequent flyer bonuses for signing up for cards. So the big financial institutions, especially in the U.S., but also in some other places in the U.K. and Australia and Canada, they have this really high lifetime value of customer, and so they're using frequent flyer points as a tool to acquire new business. And so they buy these points in bulk from the airlines, and they give them out as a one-time sign-up bonus to get you to sign up for their card. And so what you can do to sort of 80-20 earning the most points possible is you sign up for a couple cards in a set of applications, and you can earn 100 to 150,000 frequent flyer points in a couple of months. And that's enough for example, you're in Rio right now, and if you do it at the right time of year, you can get a one-way to Rio for 20,000 points. So a couple of credit card signups, and you've got like 5 one-ways back and forth from Rio to the U.S. And there's a lot of other good deals to other places around the world.
Okay, and you can sign up for as many credit cards if you want, or isn't that expensive? Don't you have like annual fees?
Yeah, so there's a few parts of it that you have to manage, and that's part of the reason why we've spent so much time trying to develop strategies for doing this in a way that's sustainable, right? Because it's great to get some free travel, but you want to protect your credit, number one, and you want to also make sure that it's something that you can do over the long run. And so sort of the key things are you can't apply for too many cards at once. So usually 2 or 3 is the maximum that you'd want to apply for at one time. And one of the tricks is actually to apply for all the cards on the same day, because the banks report those applications to the credit bureaus at the end of the business day. And so if you do them all at once, each bank doesn't see that you've applied to the other banks as well. So they think they're the only one. And so you can sort of do that. You do a set of applications, and then you wait. And you probably want to wait around 3 months before you do another set. So basically you're looking at, doing this 3 or 4 times a year. And that's enough to earn, depending on how much money you spend, it's enough to earn 200,000 to 500,000 miles a year pretty easily.
So every year you apply for a new credit card?
Yeah, so actually, every 3 to 4 months, I'll apply for a group of 2 or 3 credit cards. And so the key thing, a lot of people ask about this, like whether it hurts your credit, and it's one of the biggest misunderstandings. I'm not sure why the system's set up this way, but applying for new cards actually doesn't hurt your credit very much at all. There's a small sort of deduction that they take right when you apply because the banks recognize that if you're looking for new credit, it could be a possible indication that you're a riskier customer. But over the big picture, they're really looking at how much total credit you have available and how you're using it. So for example, if you've got a couple of cards and maybe your total credit limit's $20,000 and you're only using 10% of that, so you're just spending $2,000 at the most and then paying it off, the banks look at you and see that they think you're really responsible. And so over the long run, actually building up credit and establishing relationships with lots of different lenders, so with the different banks, American Express and Citibank and Chase, doing that actually improves your credit over the long run. But it's really important. Like, you don't want to get out there and just go crazy and sign up for like 8 or 10 cards, because that definitely will hurt your credit. You got to kind of take your time and pace yourself.
And once you get all those points, like, what's the most efficient way of using those? Because you can use them for flights, and I've used miles quite a bit in my during my travels, and I've noticed that what a flight is not always the same amount of points. Sometimes a flight is like 10,000, and then it could be 20 or 30,000, depending on how many people have booked the mileage seats. Is that correct?
The complexity is one of the reasons that the opportunity exists here, right? If it was really easy to use your miles, everybody'd sort of be getting the same value, and there wouldn't be any of those kind of oversized opportunities. And so there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One of them is that different airlines are different types of points. So each airline sort of has their own point currency. And each of them has a different system for pricing, and sometimes they do it based on distance, so how far you're flying, and sometimes they do it based on regions. So like if you're flying from the US to Europe, that's one set of regions, or US to Asia is a different one. And so if you sort of can get a overall picture of the different pricings across a couple of different programs, it makes it possible to sort of use the points that get you the best deal for the particular trip you want. So it's really something that you kind of want to start with your travel goals, and then work backwards and figure out which airlines have the right pricing to get there. The other thing to keep in mind about it is that airlines do change their prices based on how many seats they're selling. So obviously they don't want to give away those free seats if they think they can sell them, especially the business and first class ones that run $2,000 or $3,000.
Mm-hmm. Right, and there's basically 2 ways you can use miles, right? You can either buy a flight or you can get an upgrade.
Yeah, that's totally true. The upgrade is something that I don't do a ton of, just because if you have enough points, it's a lot cheaper to buy. Just use the miles to get the whole flight. But there are definitely some really good opportunities where you find an economy ticket or something that's not as expensive, and you can use your miles to upgrade to business class or first class.
Yeah, because I remember one time I flew from Singapore to Amsterdam, and I had an economy ticket, and I don't know why, but for some reason I got an offer to upgrade to business class for like 5,000 miles or something like that. It was really, really cheap.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, that's a great deal.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So that was pretty sweet, because it was Singapore Airlines, it was Lufthansa, and it was the A380. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that was pretty sweet, flying business class for just for a little bit of extra miles.
Yeah, that's such a cool aircraft too. Those are some pretty impressive. There's a lot of diversity in the way that the different airlines are laying those out in terms of where they're putting their first and business class and what kind of seats they have. So it's a really cool experience. If you have an opportunity, I definitely recommend trying to do business or first class on one of those flights. So as I said before, there's a couple of other countries that do have opportunities with the banks as well. So if you happen to live in Canada or the UK or Australia, there are definitely some opportunities to kind of get bigger sign-up bonuses and kind of get a stockpile of miles that way. But the thing that you need to keep track of as well is that most airlines still award points for flying, and for the most part based on how far you fly. And so if you're in a position where you're traveling quite a bit for work or for business, or just, a couple of vacations a year, those points definitely can add up. And so it pays to sort of pay attention to, the important things that you have to do is you need to be signed up for the airline's frequent flyer program before you take your flight. Otherwise, they won't give you credit. And you want to credit your points all to one program. And so there's basically the airlines are organized into 3 big alliances. And if you fly with one of the alliance members, you can credit your points to any of their partner airlines programs. And so the key there is that with almost all these programs, you have to have enough points to make the minimum price of the redemption. So, if it costs 50,000 points to get from the US to Asia, you can't pay 40,000 points and pay the difference in cash. And so that's something to keep in mind if you're trying to sort of get to that critical level where you have enough to make the trip that you want. And so you want to try and credit all of your paid flying, all of your travel that you're doing anyways, to the same airline program so that you're kind of accumulating all your points in one place and then redeem, for your travel from there.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, Erik, let's talk about Airbnb. What's your experience with Airbnb, and how did you find out about them?
So I started using Airbnb, I think probably pretty close to the time that they came out. I think I was one of the early adopters. I used Airbnb quite a bit in Europe, and also a lot in Buenos Aires and in various places in Brazil, and just really loved the concept and the model. I thought that it matched my travel lifestyle quite a bit better. I'm not very much of a hostel person anymore, and so to sort of be able to get your own place was revolutionary for me, and definitely added a lot of comfort to my travels. And so now I'm sort of looking at opportunities because I've met with so many great hosts, people that really had their operation put together well, and offered a ton of value to their guests. And so I think now that I've traveled quite a bit, I've seen a lot of arbitrage opportunities where the Airbnb market is way above what the local markets are. And so just those sort of, there's a lot of places where I think you can make a lot of money.
Right, and we'll talk about that more in a second. But first, did you have any really good or bad experiences as a traveler on Airbnb?
Yeah, it's a great question. Unfortunately, I haven't really had any bad experiences. I had an awesome experience in Berlin, 2 of them actually, on the same trip. I stayed sort of over on the west side of town, and the owner had kind of packaged in some bicycles for our use during the time we were staying there, and that was just that was such a huge value add. Berlin's a big bicycle city anyways, and it just made it possible to get out and see a lot. It was in a really good location, and they just sort of took care of all the little stuff. There was kind of all the amenities that you would need, coffee maker and extra stuff, and so, I think that was really good. And then the other one, I ended up finding it just a complete deal on the east side of Germany. And they had, it was like a 6-story walk up because the elevator was broken. And so we ended up getting this 3-bedroom place for €20 a night. And just had a blast. Those are probably the 2 most memorable, but I must have stayed in 20 or 30 now. So I've had a lot of really good experiences.
Okay, great. So you stayed at a lot of places. So most of our listeners are actually Airbnb hosts. So do you have any advice for them from a perspective of the customer?
Well, I mean, I think I've listened to your show quite a bit, and I think the things that you guys talk about are really important. I mean, obviously the communication. I think I'm probably a lot less stressed out as a traveler than maybe your average Airbnb visitor, and so in general, I think that making people feel secure that they're going to have a place to stay when they get there. And also, I think that one of the biggest value adds is having some sort of guide, assuming that more than just the average visitor about the place that they're coming to. It makes such a huge difference to just have, even if it's just your neighborhood, you don't have to go over the board and have a city guide put together. But if the people down the street at the cafe are just good people, and a couple of great local joints, if you can provide that information and maybe even sort of give somebody a card, grab some business cards from some of your favorite businesses, and just let the people know that are running those restaurants or cafes or bars or whatever, that, you've got some people coming into town that are staying, and, you'd appreciate if they could show them a good time. If you've got connections with some of the locals and you can kind of identify your tenants. I did have that happen to me with somebody in Brazil. He sort of had just like a set of cards. He was like, this is the great bar. This is a place where you can get breakfast. And he gave us a card, and, they were set up for like a small discount or something like that. But it was much more than just the discount. It was the impact of having somebody that was like, oh, you're staying at Paolo's place. That's so awesome. And, just immediately feeling like you've got a friend. I think that's a huge value add and not too hard to do.
Yeah, definitely. Because then that makes you feel like you're part of the neighborhood, you're like a local, right? Versus being a tourist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's definitely great advice. And I personally send out a guidebook to my guests and always get a lot of positive feedback from that. So it's really, I agree, it's really important, because if you visit an unknown area, it's very hard to find those good spots, right? Because there's so many tourist traps, especially in tourist areas, and it sucks because like having a good meal and trying like the local food is one of the best experiences you can have as a traveler. So I always feel really bad if I eat at a restaurant and it turns out to be like pretty bad. And so yeah, it's great to have some good recommendations.
Yeah, it's so disappointing. You have such limited time in a lot of cases to know a place, and you're only eating so many times a day, and so just those parts of the experience, it really makes a difference to get pointed in the right direction.
Absolutely. All right, so you were talking about some opportunities that you see in South America where you can do an arbitrage where you rent a local place and then you put it on Airbnb, correct?
Yeah, and most specifically, I think the one that I'm sort of furthest along in kind of going into the evaluating the idea is Brazil. The local market there is a little bit challenging for folks that don't speak Portuguese. It's definitely not impossible to crack. So, you don't need to go in there thinking like, if I don't speak Portuguese, this isn't an opportunity for me. But the rates that if you look at the local newspapers and you look at, a couple of sites, the ones that come to mind are Aluguel Temporada and Easy Quarto. Those are the local Brazilian sites, and you can find a place to rent using those sites for much, much cheaper than what's available on Airbnb. And on top of that, the inventory of Airbnb is really, really low. I remember just last year I was looking for a place in Rio and just didn't really I wanted the simplicity of Airbnb. A lot of times one of the things with these Brazilian sites is you're almost always going to have to pay cash. And I like being able to put it on a credit card, and I like the simplicity of booking online and not having to have more than just a conversation by text. So I was trying to find the Airbnb place, and there were maybe like 6 or 7 available in all of Copacabana at that point, and maybe just a few others in Ipanema, which are the two main beaches and like a really great place to stay if you want to get to know Rio. And so I just kind of at that point realized I went and started looking on the local sites and saw hundreds. And so just realized that, there's not enough people in Brazil that are taking advantage of the opportunity.
Right. That's pretty interesting. And how would you go about setting something up like this? Because I know there's a lot of people who are thinking about doing a similar thing. And, as Airbnb gets more well-known and people started realizing, all the opportunities that are out there, I think there's a lot of people who have this idea in mind. So what would your strategy be?
Yeah, I think that you're definitely right that it's going in that direction, that people are sort of discovering Airbnb, and it's not going to necessarily stay that way forever. But you guys talk a lot about with your guests about the importance of building a reputation and establishing yourself. And so I do think that getting in now and really starting to work on those important things, getting great reviews, facilitating an awesome customer experience, even when the Brazilian, more of the locals or other entrepreneurs, hustlers get on board in that market, I think that you're going to have a really valuable head start. And so, I think as sort of a framework, the most important thing is that you need to find a property owner that's going to be on board, that's going to be okay with you having people coming into the house. Because that definitely could be a problem. That was actually something I wanted to kind of ask you about, and how you sort of go through and vet people or evaluate that possibility of being in a spot where the neighbors have a problem with it, or somebody that has some sort of influence at the property is gonna make an issue.
Yeah, this is something that's being discussed a lot on different forums and different places, because everybody has the same question. Am I going to tell the landlord, or am I not going to tell the landlord? Now, if you do tell the landlord, there's a good chance that he's going to say no, unless you find a way to convince him that there's a lot of opportunities also for your landlord. And one way to make it more attractive is you can pay a little bit more rent. Or another thing you can do is you can invest a little bit in the property, because that's going to help you make more money on Airbnb anyway. And this is what Diego Correa, he's a guy in Buenos Aires. We had him on the show a while back, and he manages 3 apartments in Buenos Aires, and he found landlords that were willing to let him do it, but initially they didn't like it. But then he sort of convinced them. And because the most important reason why landlords don't want to do this is because there's very little upside for them. And there's some perceived downside. And the perceived downside is that they think that, letting random people from the internet into their house is going to damage their house. So you have to think, look at it from their perspective, like what's in it for them. And you have to sort of mitigate the risk. Now, what's interesting is that I actually think putting a place on Airbnb is better for your property than having a long-term renter. Just because the person who manages the apartment is going to always make sure the apartment is in good state, because otherwise you're losing out, right? It's a business.
Yeah.
So you don't see any like hotels. The hotels that are doing well, where the outside looks crappy, or like it needs a layer of paint, or the bed's broken or something like that. That doesn't happen, because then you're out of business. So that's the first thing, I think. And then the second thing is that like I said, you can make it worthwhile for them, and either invest a little bit in the house, or give them a little, like a share of the profits.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And if you pick the right location and the right house, and find somebody that you can work with, there's a lot to go around, right? It's not necessarily a zero-sum game, because the property owner can also facilitate, make it easier for you to make more money with the listing. If he gives you permission to make some improvements, and you're able to easily get people in and out and not have to worry about it, I think being upfront with them, and even if you have to give up a little bit of the extra money in terms of maybe some higher rent or some investments, it's you're dividing a bigger pie overall, and so that's a really good way to look.
Yeah, and I think that would be my preferred way to go about it, because you can obviously just rent a place and not let the owner know, but then you're always going to sort of have that worry that he's going to find out, and then your whole business is going to be killed instantly, right? So
yeah,
it's just something that I wouldn't really like to do, unless I'm pretty sure that the landlord is, maybe he lives like far away, and if I think there's a really, really small chance that he'll find out, then maybe I'll go take that route. But if I would, then I think the neighbors are a big issue. I think then you have to be really, really, really careful that your guests don't cause any disturbance, because obviously the neighbors, it's the same situation for them. There's no upside for your neighbors that you are running this Airbnb thing. So the smallest disturbance could lead them to try and block your business, and the easiest way to do that for them is to contact the landlord.
Yeah, that's a really good point as well. I mean, I think it also comes down to a little bit of a trade-off up front in that whether you're willing to invest the extra time to find an optimal situation. There's so much diversity in the layout of properties and also in the types of landlords that you can work with. That, I think if you go in with a long-term mentality and you expect that you're going to have to work a bit to find a place that's going to be ideal, that maybe, the apartment or, possibly you get to a place where you can rent out all the apartments on one floor. There's certainly a lot of buildings in Rio that are kind of built, narrow and tall, and each floor is maybe one or two apartments. And so, if you can sort of set yourself up there so that you've got an ideal situation where you're gonna minimize the risk of disturbing the neighbors, and spend enough time working to find a property owner that's excited about the opportunity to work with you. That extra investment up front is going to pay huge dividends over time, because then you can stay in there for the long term. And really build a business out of it.
Exactly, and that's much more attractive to me, to find a situation where you can build a long-term viable business and maintain good relationships with the property owner, as opposed to always having to worry that you're going to get evicted or you're going to get in trouble. Especially when you're in a country like Brazil or somewhere else where you're not too familiar with the laws and you're kind of an outsider. It's not a situation in which I would like to get into trouble.
Yeah, definitely not.
Awesome, man. So it's been great talking to you, Erik. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge on travel hacking, and I think we covered some interesting points about investment opportunities that exist because of Airbnb and how to go about it. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
No, it was awesome to be here. If there's anything that I can do to help with travel hacking, you can find us at abroaders.com, and there's a contact right on the website. So, I think that it's a huge opportunity to really lower the cost of being able to be there on the ground. Obviously, all the stuff that you and I were talking about in terms of scouting out locations and working with property owners, that's not possible if you can't get there. And so, certainly you can buy a plane ticket, but there are ways to get that travel and dramatically reduce the cost. And if you get to a point where you're scaling up and you're looking at multiple places, you're looking at doing Airbnbs in a couple of different cities, then the value is even more important. So, definitely reach out to us. We'd love to work with you guys and try and help you get some cheaper travel.
Erik, is there any specific place on your website where people can go to find the best information on how to get started? Let's say somebody has never really been into points and is listening to this episode and think like, wow, this sounds like a good opportunity. Like, do you have a resource for people who want to get started?
Honestly, the best resource is definitely the podcast. I think, start at the beginning. Our first shows are a little bit rough, but we cover a lot of the basics there. And we're covering news and updates and just keeping you up to date on what's going on with the different programs and where the biggest opportunities are. So I think the podcast is definitely the best resource. And, we've got a lot of other stuff on the site. Should be pretty easy to find. But also, as I said before, feel free to reach out to us. We answer a lot of emails and work with a lot of people on a one-on-one basis. So, happy to help.
Awesome, Erik. Well, thank you so much. And with that, we are at the end of this episode of Get Paid for Your Pad. As always, every Monday and Thursday, we have a new episode airing. And if you want to find out more about Airbnb hosting, you can go to getpaidforyourpad.com, where you can find all sorts of information. We have articles, we have a book that you can buy on Amazon, or you can also download the first 3 chapters for free. We have a free audiobook and lots of other good stuff. And if you want to check out the resources that we mentioned in this episode, then you can go to the show notes, which are at getpaidforyourpad.com/podcast. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Get paid for your pad. 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 Get paid your pet.